Mike Flynn just pled guilty to a charge of lying to the FBI. We'll explain what that means. Here we go. So the breaking news from this morning, just before the show, is that the FBI has basically now made clear that Mike Flynn lied to them. So Mike Flynn just pled guilty to a charge of lying to the FBI. What did he lie to the FBI about? Apparently he lied to the FBI because he had been speaking with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak, in order to convince Kislyak to lay off of backlash against the United States after the Obama administration, in its waning days, as retaliation for supposed Russian election interference, put new sanctions on the Russians. And you recall that Putin didn't respond to that, and there was speculation that was because Flynn had reached out to Putin and told him, don't do it, things are going to change come January 20th. I said at the time, I don't see what is particularly wrong with that. He was a transition official. It was already pretty clear he was going to be part of the administration. There's no real violation of law there, so what's the big deal? The fact, though, that he was allowed to plead on only the charge with regard to lying to the FBI suggests to me that he is about to flip on the Trump administration, and that suspicion has now been confirmed. The reason I say that this is pretty clearly a plea deal that minimizes what Flynn did is because there have been reports coming out of the Mueller probe that they were investigating Flynn for having made a deal with the Turkish government to kidnap a guy who's a Turkish dissenter from the United States and send him back to Turkey. They've been paid hundreds of thousands of dollars by the Turkish government. In other words, it looks like there were more serious charges on the table, and in exchange for those charges going away, Flynn took this much lesser charge in order to get this thing over with. So according to ABC News, here's what they are saying. They are now saying that Flynn had resisted flipping on other members of the administration for months, given his close ties with the Trump administration, but he apparently felt abandoned by the administration in recent weeks, thanks to mounting legal debts and plans to sell his house to help defray costs, according to ABC News. This is one of the big problems, seriously, one of the big problems with with special counsel investigations. Everyone is forced to lawyer up. Lawyers are incredibly expensive. If you are just a normal person, you can't afford the lawyering up that it costs to fight people like Robert Mueller, and there was no one there to pick up the cost for Mike Flynn. So in order to defray those costs, he's apparently cutting a deal with the Mueller investigation. Brian Ross on ABC News Special Report is reporting that Flynn has promised, quote, full cooperation to the Mueller team and is prepared to testify that as a candidate, Donald Trump, quote, directed him to make contact with the Russians. Now, the people on the left are going nuts. Clearly, we're almost there. We're almost there, gang. This means that Mike Flynn is going to testify that Donald Trump told him to coordinate campaign activities with the Russians, and that's why Hillary Clinton lost the election. That is not clear by any stretch of the imagination. There is lots of coordination between the Hillary Clinton team, for example, and we know members of the Ukrainian government. The idea that members of campaigns don't talk to foreign officials is just not true. So it's quite possible that Trump told Flynn, I want you to go talk to Putin, talk to him about what their priorities are, what our priorities are if I become president of the United States. None of that is illegal. None of that is illegal. The only thing that would be illegal is presumably if there was actually a conspiracy, an exchange of information that would be designed to subvert the United States election, and there are actual conspiracy laws, then you'd have to see if they violate them legally, and that's a little bit difficult to prove. Collusion is not a crime. In other words, even if collusion occurred, that might be grounds for the political crime of impeachment, that would require impeachment, but it's not grounds for any actual crime that has been committed. Right? Collusion is not a crime. There is no statute on collusion. It's a vague term of art. So this does not get all the way toward proving anything about Trump. We still have to see what Flynn has to say. Now, there are two possibilities here. One is that Flynn is actually going to say some stuff that's really damaging about the president. In favor of this possibility is the reality that Mueller cut a deal with Flynn that basically let Flynn almost entirely off the hook for all of these other charges. So why would you cut such a deal that was generous to Flynn? Because Flynn's about to give you a bunch of good stuff. Right? Think of your godfather. Right? Frank Pantangeli is going to get off the hook so long as he testifies against Michael Corleone. Okay? The reason that you're going to downgrade charges is because you're trying to get Flynn to actually give you valuable information. If you don't believe Flynn has valuable information, you don't cut a deal with him at all. You just send him to jail. So that's cutting in favor of that. There's also the possibility, however, that the special counsel is charging Flynn on the lying to the FBI charge because what he is hoping is that now he's going to be able to go after other members of the Trump administration for the same thing. That there will be a sort of domino effect that he's sort of fishing. That what he's doing here is he's going to nail Flynn on the lying to the FBI charge, get him to plead out on that, and then they're going to go back and talk to some other folks who have talked to the FBI, I think in the administration. That includes, I think Kushner has talked to the FBI. I think there's several other members of the administration who have talked to the FBI. the possibility exists that they will try to have Flynn testify against those people and then try and get those people on charges of lying to the FBI and try and flip this upward, right? Create a domino effect, and maybe one of those people flips on the president and finally spills the beans about the president. But that is not the same thing as Flynn himself is directly going to implicate the president in any sort of criminal activity. So it's a little early for all of the speculation that's going on. It is not clear by any stretch of the imagination that all of this is is going to bring down the president of the United States. There's a lot of I think unbased speculation from both sides. People on the right going, "This is a big nothing, right? They didn't charge him with anything," and people on the left going, "They've charged him with something. We're about to get Trump. President Pence is coming." I don't know that any of this is going to be true. So we just don't know enough yet. We do know that something more is happening in the investigation than we thought was happening yesterday. Reuters, by the way, ABC is saying that candidate Trump ordered him to make contact with the Russians. That's what ABC is reporting. Reuters is reporting that Flynn is saying that the transition team ordered him to make contact with the Russians. If it's the transition team, that has nothing to do with the campaign. So it's hard even to imagine what the crime would be at that point. The transition team ordering Flynn to talk with the Russians, like, who cares? Unless we're just going to round up a bunch of people unjustly. And this is something that special counsels have done in the past. You recall that it was special counsel, I believe it was Patrick Fitzgerald, who went after Scooter Libby. Scooter Libby was working for the President of the United States. He was an American lawyer, former advisor to VP Dick Cheney. And you recall that he actually ended up in jail, and he was pardoned by President Trump, or his sentence was commuted, more specifically, by President Bush, because Scooter Libby had apparently fibbed to the FBI, but there was no underlying crime. So they got Scooter Libby for fibbing to the FBI, or obstruction of justice, but he had not actually done anything wrong. There was no underlying crime. Nothing criminal had taken place. He hadn't done it. Nobody in the administration had done it. Basically, remember, that was about Valerie Plame. The situation in that particular case was that Valerie Plame was a covert CIA agent. She was in Washington. She was not really in the field. And there was a leak about her identity after Joe Wilson, her husband, suggested that the Bush administration had lied about yellow cake from Niger being sold to the Iraqi regime. And the person who actually ended up doing it, I believe, was Richard Armitage. That was the person who had ended up leaking it was not, in fact, Scooter Libby. It was Richard Armitage. But Libby had apparently fibbed to the FBI in the process of the investigation, and they decided to go after Libby instead. It was really a bunch of nonsense. They went after him just because they felt like going after him. And that's why President Bush ended up commuting his sentence. He really should have pardoned him. In this particular case, it could be something very similar. We just don't know at this point. So anybody who's telling you it's all over, we know what the story is, Trump is going down, don't believe them at this point. There's just not enough information on that yet for that to be the case. We don't know what Mike Flynn is going to tell the FBI, or what he has told the FBI at this point. So we're going to find out. We're going to find out. By the way, it is worth noting also, the White House says that they have no comment on this at this point, which is the proper stance. In the middle of a legal proceeding, the last thing you want to do is start going out and mouthing off. Mike Flynn had made comments in 2016. It's going to get played all over the news today, that if he did a tenth of what Hillary Clinton had done, he would be in jail today. There's a real possibility that is true, by the way, that he really did not do much here, and that he could end up in jail anyway, just because this is the way that political prosecutions go. So I'm not saying it's a political prosecution. I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. So don't buy all the speculation that's going on today. It's time to hold judgment in abeyance until you actually have more information. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show. The primaries voted for Trump in the general election, very strongly supported Trump in the general election. He and I disagreed about that. And David and I were talking, and we talked at length about Roy Moore. And he said that he was annoyed by the number of people who were basically saying that it was morally inconceivable to vote for Moore. Again, and he made the same argument that he made during 2016. It's a binary call. You got to vote for one or the other. It's either Doug Jones or Roy Moore. And Doug Jones is pro-abortion. Roy Moore isn't. You may think that Roy Moore is a scuzzbag, but acknowledge that it's a bad choice and you have to make it. I've always said I thought that was the strongest argument in favor of Moore, although I think that, points for honesty, although I think that it doesn't wash for me, because I think that you can't treat every election in isolation. If we keep saying that every election is the only election that matters, then pretty soon very few elections matter, because we're just an election. The whole point of this is that you preserve your character so you can fight another day. You preserve your character so you can have the moral high ground, and that's important. That's my point. But I'm not begrudging people who make a different calculation, right? I think that I understand your argument. I just don't agree with it. Right? I may not agree with it morally. I may not agree with it in a utilitarian sense, but I understand the argument. I'm not going to pretend that the argument doesn't have some weight. It obviously does. But what does bother me is all the people are trying to convince themselves that Moore is innocent, right? That Moore didn't do anything at all. I think that it is highly unlikely, let me put it that way, Very, very unlikely that Moore didn't do anything, given the fact that there are 9 women who have made allegations about Roy Moore. Yesterday, Roy Moore was trotting out his latest conspiracy theory, and this is what drives me nuts about the partisan hackery of all of this, is that if you wildly allege things, then people on your own side will buy into it so long as it serves their political purposes. Here's what Roy Moore had to say about how these allegations came to fruition.
When I say they, who are they? They're liberals. They don't hold conservative values. They're the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender who want to change our culture. They're socialists who want to change our way of life. Putting man above God. And the government is our God. They're the Washington establishment. It simply wants to keep their jobs, do the same thing, keep everything the same so they don't lose their position, their power, and their prestige.
Okay, so there he goes, essentially saying that the people who are trying to stop him are all liberals. They're lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgenders who want to change our culture. The socialists are behind these allegations. Okay, the 2 women who are behind the allegations are apparently, who are behind the main allegations. One says that she was 16 when Roy Moore took her out into his car and essentially tried to rape her. That's the one with the yearbook. And then the other woman who came forward and said she was 14 when Roy Moore took her home and tried to molest her. Both of these women are Trump supporters. They're white, straight Trump supporters. So no, this is not just about the quote-unquote liberal agenda. It is about whether Roy Moore did this stuff or not for a lot of these people. But as long as you're willing to put everything in the box of conspiratorialism, you're able to get away with everything. And you're seeing that now Moore's best supporters are moving this direction. They can't deal with the cognitive dissonance of just saying Roy Moore may have done some really bad stuff years ago. Like really bad stuff years ago, but we're going to vote for him anyway, which is what Kay Ivey, the governor of Alabama, was honest enough to say. Now they're trying to rehabilitate Moore and say that all of this is nonsense, which, again, I think this puts us in a very difficult position if you're trying to be intellectually honest. Here's Mo Brooks, who ran against Moore in the primaries and lost, saying that the yearbook is forged, the woman who alleges that Moore signed her yearbook and then tried to rape her, basically, that yearbook is forged.
There are only 2 that have asserted that Roy Moore engaged in unlawful conduct. One of those is clearly a liar because that one forged the Love Roy Moore part of a yearbook in order to try to, for whatever reason, get at Roy Moore and win this seat for the Democrats.
Let me ask
and there's
you.
a lot more to it as to why I believe that the evidence is almost uncontrovertible about whether the yearbook was forged. So now you're down to 1 witness. And you look at the preponderance of the evidence, and then you add Roy Moore's denial in it. You add his long, deeply held Christian beliefs, and I just don't think there's anywhere in the world that a jury would agree with the assertions of the Washington Post.
So the allegations
that
the yearbook are fake. That would be the weirdest story ever if the yearbook were indeed forged. And there's a second allegation by a woman who has nothing to do with the yearbook. So again, deal with the cognitive dissonance. Okay, if you want to own it, own it. If you want to say, listen, we have to elect bad guys because there are worse guys out there, we have to stop. Own that argument. But do not recast evidence. Do not pretend bad things didn't happen because it's uncomfortable for you to admit that you're voting for a guy who's done some pretty terrible things or who's allegedly done some pretty terrible things. Okay, so meanwhile, President Trump